Welcome to this explainer. Today we're setting the stage for an absolutely incredible journey through thousands of years of human life, ideas, and revolutions. We are about to explore a narrative that isn't just a list of names and dates, but a sweeping epic of survival, resilience, and transformation. If you've ever wondered how one of the world's most vibrant societies came to be, well, you're in exactly the right place.
You know, there's a famous saying, India is not just a country, it is a civilization. And honestly, that's the perfect hook for our story today. We aren't just looking at some linear, boring timeline. We're looking at the epic story of a civilization that falls, changes, suffers, rebuilds, and absolutely refuses to disappear. It's a land of kings and saints, ideas and empires, rivers and religions.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 major chapters. Ancient India, cities and ideas. Medieval India, empires and art. British rule and exploitation. The struggle for freedom, and finally, modern India, a republic.
So, let's kick things off with Chapter 1, Ancient India, Cities and Ideas.
Our journey begins way back, around 2600 BCE with the Indus Valley Civilization. From there, we move into the Vedic Age, around 1900 BCE, which is really where the deep philosophical inquiries of the Upanishads got their start. Fast forward to the 6th century BCE, and we see profound spiritual movements like Buddhism and Jainism taking root. Then, boom, we get massive political consolidation with the Maurya Empire around 322 BCE, famously led by figures like Chandragupta and the peace-seeking Ashoka, before flowing right into the intellectual flourishing of the Gupta Empire in the 4th century CE.
But wait, looking back at the very beginning of that timeline, we have to ask a massive question. Why did the advanced, meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley suddenly decline around 1900 BC? It's honestly one of history's greatest mysteries. In cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, everyday people had incredible brick houses and indoor plumbing systems that literally rivaled some 18th century European cities. Crazy, right? Yet despite this brilliance, historians believe a mix of climate change, shifting rivers, floods, and droughts slowly weakened these cities, forcing ordinary folks to pack up, migrate, and adapt.
And adapt they did. Indian civilization eventually settled and totally flourished again centuries later during the Gupta Empire, which is often called the Golden Age. And this brilliantly illustrates a key point. True greatness here wasn't just about military might or weapons. It came from knowledge, art, and philosophy. I mean, we're talking about the concept of zero formulated by mathematicians like Aryabhata, which absolutely revolutionized global technology forever. Plus, we see the majestic Sanskrit poetry of Kalidasa and massive, bustling universities like Nalanda that were drawing in scholars from all over the known world.
All right, moving on to Chapter 2, Medieval India, Empires and Art. Now, it's crucial to remember that Indian history is not a single straight line. It's more like a massive river with dozens of branches. Up in the north, we see land-based powers. You've got the fierce courage of the Rajput fortresses and the major architectural and political shifts brought in by the Turkish and Afghan influences of the Delhi Sultanate. Meanwhile, down in the south, empires like the Cholas were building incredible naval power. They dominated sea trade across the Indian Ocean and constructed absolutely monumental structures like the Brihadishwara Temple. And these regions weren't isolated. They were constantly interacting through trade, war, and rich cultural exchange.
Out of this super dynamic landscape rose the Mughal Empire. It kicks off in 1526 when Babur wins the first battle of Panipat. But the real game changer here is Akbar. Akbar realized that ruling a vast, incredibly diverse India required wisdom, cooperation, and respect for different communities, not just brute force. This stability allowed for some amazing cultural peaks, like, Shah Jahan building the magnificent Taj Mahal. However, under Aurangzeb, the empire expanded to its absolute physical limits, but generated heavy conflicts and totally exhausted its resources, setting the stage for its decline by 1707.
Now, what's really interesting about this era is what was happening away from the thrones. While kings were busy fighting battles, ordinary people were finding their own voices. The Bhakti and Sufi movements swept through the population. Saints like Kabir and Mirabai taught that true devotion, peace, and closeness to God were way more important than rigid caste rituals or social status. By preaching in local languages, they connected directly with everyday people. They basically created this deeply poetic, spiritual society that completely transcended political borders.
That brings us to Chapter 3, British Rule and Exploitation.
The transformation we see here is honestly staggering.
In the early 1600s, the British East India Company arrived purely as traders. They were just looking for profit, hungry for India's world-famous spices and handmade textiles. But by the mid-1700s, that desire for cloth and spices had morphed into an actual empire. They literally transformed into political rulers, commanding private armies and collecting the revenue of entire wealthy regions.
Let's move to how this builds, because this takeover was incredibly systematic. Step 1, they arrive for trade. Step 2 is a massive turning point, winning the Battle of Plassey in 1757, which secured them a foothold in incredibly wealthy Bengal. Fast forward to Step 3, the Battle of Buxar in 1764, which actually grants them tax collection rights, meaning they now had India's own wealth to fund their expansion. Finally, Step 4, using clever alliances and policies like the doctrine of lapse, they established direct control. And this systematic takeover left India's traditional artisans heavily damaged and its farmers absolutely crushed under new, heavy British taxes.
But this era also sparked a really profound question among educated Indians. If liberty, equality, and rights were so good for Europe, why not for India? Ironically, the very tools the British introduced to control and exploit the country, things like the English language, modern education, railways, and telegraphs, inadvertently gave Indian thinkers the exact tools they needed to fight back. They could suddenly communicate across vast regional divides, organize their thoughts, and begin to seriously question British power.
Which perfectly sets up Chapter 4, the struggle for freedom.
This resistance truly exploded onto the scene with a massive revolt of 1857, driven by a powerful coalition of angry soldiers, displaced kings, and heavily taxed farmers. Now, the 1857 revolt was crushed, but the spirit of resistance was permanently awake. By 1905, the Partition of Bengal sparked the Swadeshi movement, a massive boycott of British goods. Then, in 1915, Mahatma Gandhi returns to India, fundamentally changing the movement's scale. We see this culminate in huge events like the 1930 Salt March and ultimately the definitive Quit India movement in 1942. What started as polite petitions by the early Indian National Congress had evolved into unstoppable mass boycotts.
At the very heart of this mass movement was an incredible concept, satyagraha, holding firmly to truth. Gandhi's absolute genius was bringing ordinary people, farmers, women, students, and workers, into the movement through nonviolence, discipline, and self-reliance. He proved that you didn't need a standing army to fight an empire. I mean, in a stroke of genius, he literally walked to the sea to make salt, a heavily taxed necessity. He proved that something as simple as a handful of salt could become a devastating weapon against injustice.
But it is absolutely vital to remember that the freedom struggle wasn't just the story of one person or one method. It was a river of millions. You had moderates like Dadabhai Naoroji exposing the economic drain of wealth. You had mass nonviolent protests and people spinning khadi cloth. But you also had fierce armed resistance led by Subhash Chandra Bose and his Indian National Army, and brilliant revolutionary thinkers like Bhagat Singh who didn't just want the British gone, they wanted a truly just society. And crucially, we can't forget the thousands upon thousands of ordinary women who stepped out of their homes to lead protests and willingly go to jail.
And finally, we arrive at Chapter 5, Modern India, a Republic.
All of these streams of resistance finally converged on August 15, 1947, when centuries of colonial rule finally came to an end. So the crucial point is, we must understand the duality of this moment. Independence was a moment of immense joy, but partition brought profound tragedy. We have to impartially note the deep emotional wounds, the devastating communal violence, the fear, and the displacement of millions of people whose lives and families were violently uprooted practically overnight. Freedom arrived for sure, but it arrived with very deep scars.
From that painful birth, the incredible task of rebuilding began. And what a monumental task it was to turn a poor, deeply divided country into a modern democratic powerhouse. Leaders like Sardar Patel managed the near-impossible task of peacefully integrating hundreds of independent princely states. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar helped draft a constitution in 1950 that boldly chose the difficult, chaotic, but incredibly powerful path of democracy for a massively diverse population. Over the decades, India tackled massive food shortages through the Green Revolution, and by 1991, economic reforms opened the doors, transforming the nation into a global hub for tech and trade.
Which brings us to the core lesson of this entire explainer. India has always changed, but India has always continued. It refused to disappear. Through invasions, the rise and fall of empires, the harsh extraction of colonialism, and the agonizing pain of partition, it wasn't just kings and politicians who kept this civilization alive. It was the ordinary people,
The farmers, the teachers, the artists, the women, who carried the memory, the culture, and the immense courage of this civilization forward through time.
So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to reflect on. As modern India balances cutting-edge space technology and a booming digital economy with thousands of years of deep-rooted tradition, how will this ancient, unbroken river of civilization shape the future of our world? The story of India is far from over. In fact, its next chapter is being written right now. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning about this fascinating history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.